Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. 5th of February, Outsiders.
Andrew, Street
The
Spectator
continuation.
contributor James Allen and the University of Adelaide's Carol Johnson. Now, the media consensus this week, Phil Curry in the AFR, Mark Kenny in Fairfax, Paul Buongiorno on this network, the conventional wisdom is that Turnbull emerged much better than Trump in this telephone spat. Carol, your thoughts?
Well, he did by normal standards of politics, Tom. The trouble is that the normal standards of politics aren't operating. I mean, he emerged, I mean, that's the real problem he has. And that's one of the issues he has. I mean, John Howard always said the times will suit me. These times are actually not times that are suiting Malcolm Turnbull for all the reasons that other columnists have mentioned. The rise of the populist right internationally that he's now dealing with. I mean, he is not an easy populist. And remember, too, that some of these populist rights are pushing protectionist policies. And that's going to be a problem for Turnbull because
as was Hillary Clinton, by the way. At the end of the election campaign, you could have put a piece of paper between Trump and Clinton's views on trade.
Well, Bernie Sanders had certainly pushed her in that direction, and she was not supporting the TPP, for example, but she wasn't going as far as Trump in sort of proposing that there virtually be a trade war with China.
And Carol, to be fair, I think Malcolm Turnbull, you're right. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull would have preferred Hillary Clinton. And indeed, that was presumably the view of both sides of politics in Canberra, that Hillary Clinton would be a better Prime Minister for Australia and that she would win. But they were obviously wrong on the latter one.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I mean, Hillary Clinton, I think, was someone they felt they could deal with. They knew that while Bernie Sanders had pushed it a bit to the left, that actually on economic issues and other issues, she was actually a bit more onto the right of some other Democrats, while being once again having small L liberal values on various issues. So this is going to be very hard for Turnbull to deal with, especially if it does, for example, contribute to a trade war with China, or I hate to say, even worse. And if now, in terms of getting through that refugee deal, that Turnbull's had to make potential concessions on issues about what we're going to do in the South China Sea, for example.
Jim?
Well, it's these kind of commentaries that got Brexit wrong and got Trump wrong. Look, I'm the biggest free trade law professor in the country, I would say. I value it a lot. But Mr. Trump is not anywhere near as negative as you think. I don't like his protectionism. But he is offering trade deals with the UK. He has made it plain that his targets are places like China. Now, I don't particularly like that because free trade has lifted a few hundred million people out of poverty in China. But the fact is that China is a trade manipulator. And the fact is that China cheats down the line. And also, when you carefully go through the TPP, which I'm sure the other two panelists have, it's not nearly as wonderful as people are painting out. Some of the intellectual property things are very problematic.
Oh, absolutely.
And if we go back to Andrew's comment, I was raised an atheist. I would vote if I got a vote on the same-sex marriage. I would vote for same-sex marriage. But he sits there and sort of insouciantly pretends that when a party goes into an election with a rock-solid promise to the voters, what they really ought to do is get elected and lie and just do something different. And it's that sort of attitude that actually brings in the Trumps of the world. The Liberals went to the last election saying it's a referendum or nothing, it's a plebiscite or nothing. And for a commentator to say, oh, well, nobody, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nobody really thinks we actually meant that, that is a terrible way for the Liberal Party to operate, in my view.
Andrew? Except that they don't have the mandate to do that. I mean, it's one thing to say when you're going...
So don't do anything then, you wait till the next election.
When you're going to an election, you lay out your planned policies, you lay out your values, and then when you get into Parliament, you look at your one-seat majority and you look at your difficult Senate, and you temper your expectations accordingly.
So don't do anything then. You wait till the next election. If the Labour Party won't put through the plebiscite, it sits with them.
Now, let's turn back to the issue of border protection because, Carol, if the US only takes some of those refugees on Manus and Nauru after this extreme vetting, what then? I mean, where does that leave the rest and the government's offshore policy? How does Turnbull respond to that possible outcome?
Well, I think they'll be in a very difficult situation, and I think that's quite likely to happen, even though these people have gone through considerable vetting. And even though that the UN's certified that they're refugees, I mean, Trump will be wanting to save some face on this deal, won't he? He'll be wanting to look at least as though, if he does go ahead with it, that at least they haven't accepted everyone and they have knocked some people back. So it leaves the government in a very delicate situation, particularly because Turnbull's been so strong in saying that basically the deal will go through. I mean, he maybe should have been a bit more careful about precisely how he worded that. I think he thought he probably did have a firm commitment. I think he probably thought if he said that, the government would feel committed. But once again, as we're saying, these are not normal political times. Trump is not a normal president that you deal with in a normal diplomatic way.
Jim, what happens if a significant segment of those refugees are rejected by the Americans? What then?
Well, again, let's just go back and look at that deal. He cut it with the president before the election when there was a chance the new guy would come in who had said, I don't want a deal like this. I don't want to take these people. And then he announced it 5 days after the election. He is leading a party where one of his cabinet ministers before the election called Mr. Trump a dropkick. And we know that that will have gotten back to Mr. Trump. It was abundantly plain he didn't want Trump to win. And he's boxed Mr. Trump in. By cutting a deal with his predecessor, you would not normally do that. So to say that Mr. Trump has lost face, you know, they're certainly not seeing it that way in the U.S., I don't think, certainly not Mr. Trump supporters. His wanting to block people from these 7 countries, the 7 countries, by the way, which he took from Mr. Obama, he's winning all the polls on this in the U.S. So I don't think people in Australia are really getting the sense that Mr. Trump doesn't care about the views of the media and the sort of commentariat that actually hasn't predicted anything correctly in about a year and a half.
Andrew, to what extent does all this mean that Malcolm Turnbull could be damaged goods, especially if the refugees are rejected after all?
I think it's a huge problem for him because he has pinned so much on this. I mean, a lot of the narrative this week has been that he cut this deal. He cut this deal with Trump. He cut this special deal for Australians.
He didn't cut the deal with Trump.
No.
He cut it with Obama.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the problem, that he has given the narrative that began the week was that he was this trusted confidant of the United States. He cut this deal. He was going to get success with this. And when this doesn't happen, and I can pretty much guarantee that whatever success is going to come out of this deal, it will be maybe a handful of Christian families on Nauru might get resettled. There'll be massive photo opportunities, but the chances of any of the single men, predominantly Muslim, predominantly from countries which Trump has singled out as for the travel ban, being resettled, there's no way that Trump is going to do that. There's absolutely no reason for him to do so. It goes against everything that he's banked on, and it will again show him being strong. And that's Manus Island is the problem. That's the one that's going to have to be closed. The Supreme Court of Papua New Guinea have ruled. That camp's got to go. And we can't, again, we're back in the situation where if we won't take them here, we can't send them back, and there's no third country. I mean, they're stuck in limbo yet again.
Extraordinary. Carol, finally, I want to get your thoughts about this Liberal Party donation admission by the Prime Minister on the 7:30 program this week. Malcolm Turnbull and his wife Lucy personally donated $1.75 million to the Liberal Party during the last election campaign. Now, he is stung by this Harbourside Mansion tag, first coined by Peter Credlin, Tony Abbott's former Chief of Staff. To what extent does this controversy hurt his image?
I think it does hurt his image because Labor can now make the case that basically he was trying to buy the Prime Ministership, which of course is hyperbole, but it's a good line, isn't it, for them to use? And I mean, it feeds into the arguments that Labor's been pushing all along that they are the
Carol,
party.
sorry, didn't that work for Trump though?
Well,
to be fair.
but he then depicted himself as being a supporter of being a wealthy businessman who had the expertise to bring in jobs and who was a supporter of the white working class.
And an outsider too, Carol, an outsider.
And an outsider, exactly. Whereas the trouble with Turnbull is that even though he does have previous business experience, he seems, as I think Andrew explained very clearly, he seems to be a member of the elite, as Andrew explained in one of his blogs. And it feeds in while Labor's pushing the arguments that Australia is becoming more unequal, that they're standing up for ordinary working class and middle class voters. it plays into that argument, like Susan Lee suddenly deciding to buy an $800,000 property on a whim, that this government is seriously out of touch with the everyday economic concerns of ordinary Australians, and that's the danger.
Carol Johnson from the University of Adelaide, Fairfax columnist Andrew Street, and James Allen from the University of Queensland. James, Carol, Andrew, thanks so much for being on Sunday Extra.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Well, I agree with the writers and producers of South Park, the cartoon show that runs on TV, sort of like Simpsons on steroids. They've decided to stop doing any comedy about Donald Trump because he's so busy caricaturing himself that they can't keep up. You can't think of anything to make a joke out of that Donald Trump isn't doing for himself. Tronald Dump, as I call him. I like to spoonerise him. Sort of like the bit of graffiti that said, "Johnny Coward is an evil hunt." Well, he was an evil cunt. Donald Trump's had his ban on Muslims, which is not a ban on Muslims. It's a ban on people who come from countries which are predominantly Muslim and they are not Christian. He's had that ban knocked down by the federal court judge in Seattle, and he's now described that person as a so-called judge who's taking away law and order from America. So there's a battle on between the judicial and the executive branches of government in the excited states. I heard last Friday that California had, some senator in California had tabled a bill to hold an election into withdrawing from the Union of the Federated States of America. So if you know a Chinaman who's got a flag making factory, you want to make a couple of container loads of 49 starred US flags. If you can get them out in time for California to secede from the excited states, I reckon you'll make a killing financially. That's assuming there's any sort of market trading activity occurring in what remains of the excited states of Norte Armed Americano. Because, yeah, they want to have a trade war with China at the same time their new Secretary of State, Tillerson, he wants to deny China access to their freshly constructed bases on the reclaimed Spratly Islands. Mad Dog Mattis reckons Russia's a big problem. They've still got 4,000 American troops running around in Poland and the Baltic states, triggering all Putin's great patriotic war fetish defensive reflexes. And yeah, this business of what are we going to do with all of the United Nations certified refugees that we've been indeterminately delaying and indefinitely detaining in our gulag of concentration camps in the Southwest Pacific. 2 islands on the other side of New Guinea. They're nowhere near Australia. Nowhere near Australia at all. Manus Island and Nauru. Why don't we just do what Malcolm Fraser did when, there was 150,000 boat people running away from Vietnam because we spent from the 1950s to the 1970s propping up the capitalist puppet regime in Saigon, and then we ran away and we watched from a distance while the North Vietnamese communists came down, and all of the people who'd been collaborating with the enemy, which was us, got scared and wanted to run away. Malcolm Fraser just let them in. It doesn't stop the kangaroos from mowing my lawn for me. Australia is still Australia if we take in some migrants. The stringy bark trees are still here, despite all the landless, ignorant peasants who came here from Europe the last 248 years. I've always thought that if you got to Australia by boat, the fact that you'd arrived here meant that you pretty much deserved to get here, and the smaller and the rattier and the tattier the boat, the harder your voyage had been, then the more you were entitled to stay here once you got here. But, that's just taken a bit of a fair-minded thing, and looking back on what my grandparents and parents told me about the first white settlers to Australia and how bloody hard it was for them to show up in a boat, and the simple fact that they were here, they didn't get eaten by the sharks, that meant they were obviously destined by fate or the gods or the one god or whatever to be here. Anyway, we're on the upload limit. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Tronald Dump's a fucking laughing stock. Ciao.